Welcome back. For years, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the Public Lands Council have advocated on behalf of those ranchers that hold public lands grazing permits. Russell Nemetz caught up to Ethan Lane, Executive Director of the PLC and NCBA Federal Lands, to get his thoughts on the challenges and opportunities facing these ranchers.
Kevin, those federal land ranchers out there play a significant role in the U.S. beef cattle industry. And with us today to talk about some of those key issues impacting federal land ranchers across America is Ethan Lane, the Executive Director of the Public Lands Council and NCBA Federal Lands. Ethan, maybe walk us through some of those issues that federal land ranchers are dealing with these days that maybe those non-federal land ranchers don't have to worry about so much.
Sure. Well, obviously at the top of that list is the permitting process. If you own your ranch, it's deeded property. For the most part, you can do what you need to do there. Obviously, we wrestle with challenges with clean water and other things across the country with ranchers operating on private land. But when you introduce multiple government agencies having a real say in how you run your business on a day-to-day basis, it changes the game significantly. So what we really spend our time with in the West is making sure to clear those roadblocks to rightful renewals of those permits. These ranchers have had these federal land permits in their families sometimes for generations. They've been stewards of this land. They've cared for these resources. The wildlife populations we see on these ranches are there because of the good work our members do taking care of those landscapes. So what we really spend most of our time doing is blocking and tackling to make sure that federal overregulation or litigious environmental groups or others that really don't want to see the cattle industry succeed on these landscapes are kept at bay so that ranchers can do what they do best, which is take care of the land and produce good, high-quality beef.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes that task is easier said than done. That's why it's so important to have the PLC and NCBA working every single day on these issues back in Washington, D.C. Walk us through some of those other issues that are affecting those public land ranchers today.
At the top of the list is the Endangered Species Act. Obviously, we have problems with the Endangered Species Act across the country, but it really is intensified in the West because of that heavy federal footprint. So what we see time and again are these hundreds of species. We're at about 2,000 species listed on the Endangered Species Act today. About 1,000 of those are here in the United States. And most of those are sort of species that are petitioned by these environmental groups as sort of weapons to target and shut down operations on federal lands. So whether we're talking about the wolf, the grizzly bear, the greater sage grouse, the lesser prairie chicken, the Prebus jumping mouse, the list goes on, and we're looking down the road towards species like the monarch butterfly. Every one of these has the potential to totally derail operations in different parts of the country. Or in these big species like the monarch, we're talking about most of the middle of the country. So it's critical that we make some modernization to the Endangered Species Act that absolutely changes the way that it's working right now. Right now it's totally focused on that listing process because that's where the litigants from the environmental community have focused all of their effort. We want to change that paradigm so that the focus is really on recovering species that need the help and processing them off that list, delisting them and returning them to state management where they belong. That way those resources at the federal level can be focused on species that actually need the help. So we're sort of trying to de-weaponize the Endangered Species Act and make it work sort of the way the American people already think that it does.
What about the issue of wildfire and wildfire control, not just on our federal lands, but also the non-federal lands out there? Because it's another big topic that PLC and NCBA work on every single year.
Well, and these issues go hand in hand. When you have ranchers removed from these landscapes or when their stocking rates are cut because of an Endangered Species Act listing or something else, you get less of that reduction in fuel loads from cattle going out on those landscapes and keeping those fuel loads in check. The result of that, especially coming out of a wet winter like we had last winter and a hot, dry summer, is catastrophic wildfire. And that catastrophic wildfire threat is detrimental not just to the rancher's ability to use that forage, it's detrimental to the species that are on that landscape. And if you get into a fire cycle like we see in some parts of the country where it burns, It grows back with invasive weeds. It burns again hot and fast. It depletes the nutrients in the soil, and what we get year over year is a lack of real production moving forward. And everybody loses when that happens. So it's critically important that not only we get ranchers out on that landscape grazing early and often to keep those fuel loads in check, but that they're really sort of kept in the process because they know how those resources need to be cared for, and the agencies need to be integrating them into those conversations to make sure their input's heard.
What about this new grazing tool I've been hearing about?
Well, I mean, the tool just is grazing. I mean, it's pretty uncomplicated, to be honest with you. We were in parts of Idaho back in the spring, right out of that wet season, and we were looking at grass that was up to our knees in some areas. And the BLM that was out on the ground with us looked at those resources, and they said, you know, we could use thousands more cattle out here than we have, but our hands are tied by the permitting restrictions that we have in place right now. We need the flexibility to open these gates and let ranchers bring more cattle in to bring these fuel loads down. And the only way to do that is to work with Congress and build some flexibility into the laws so that ranchers have the ability to do what they know they need to do and what they're already able to do on their private land.
Hey, Ethan, let's talk about the relationship between the PLC and the NCBA and the Bureau of Land Management now.
You know, the Bureau of Land Management is such a huge part of what we do in the West, and obviously it's a relationship that's fraught on occasion. You know, we have a lot of ranchers that are always frustrated with the BLM. I'm usually frustrated with at least part of the BLM. In this new administration, we've really kind of been given a fresh start. We have new staff coming in. We have old staff that, if I'm being honest, almost seem like a weight's been lifted from their shoulders. They feel more free now to talk about some of the solutions that I think privately they've been willing to acknowledge are out there for quite some time. That's giving us an opportunity to revisit issues like wild horse management, to revisit some of these sage-grouse resource management plans that were published back in 2015 that have so heavily impacted ranchers across the West, and also revisit just how grazing is used and how ranchers are used as management tools for those resources in the West. I mean, we know when BLM has an ungrazed acre, it costs them about $5 to manage. If we put a rancher on that same landscape, the cost drops to $2 an acre. So we are an essential part of their management structure. We just have to help them understand how to streamline that process so that they can take full advantage of that. And we think we've got an audience now at the current BLM with Secretary Zinke at Interior and with the new BLM director to really work through that process and kind of set ourselves up for the next 30 years.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to wrap up with that. It seems like there is a ton of common sense, if you will, back in the Interior Department, and it's been fun to have Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, a Westerner out of the state of Montana, kind of heading up things.
You know, it's kind of fun to have Ryan. I mean, Ryan was always a great member of Congress when we were on the Hill. When he was a member from Montana, we always had a great relationship with him. Walking into Interior now and seeing him and having him smile at us and know who we are and be excited to see us is a complete game changer. It just makes it fun to go to Interior now, and you know, I think that's been infectious. His staff that he's brought into place are the same way, and it just changes the game completely and how we deal with the agency.
Well, we certainly appreciate you joining us on the program today, Ethan.
Appreciate you having me.
All right, Kevin, as always, a ton of issues going on that are affecting our federal land ranchers out there, but it's also fun to be able to talk about all the good things that those federal land ranchers are doing for the environment on those federal lands. With that, we'll go ahead and send it back to you.